Dwayne Madsen report this Sunday Roundup, and we're coming to you live tonight from Washington, D.C. And before we go to our guest, let's play this clip. This is from Sky News, the reporter in Tripoli who's reporting on how people are still celebrating victories by the Gaddafi forces against the rebels. It almost sounds like some sort of scene from Star Wars or something. But anyway, let's go to this clip.
Well, Paul, I just want to give you a quick sense of the streets here in Tripoli this morning. We're right in the centre, in the heart of Tripoli. You can see that people are driving around the streets where we are. They're waving the green flags of Colonel Gaddafi. They're tapping their horns. It's been like this for a few hours now. Well, there you go. You heard it live from that man on the street there shouting, "We support Muammar Gaddafi." The situation is, though, that overnight we've had 4 hours of very heavy, very intensive gunfire. We heard machine gun fire at one point. There was small arms fire as well. We think the small arms was from people out and about on the streets. The authorities here saying celebrating victories which they've been told the regime here has achieved in other cities across this country. Here you go. There's a spontaneous reaction to those announcements on Libyan state television. The claims that other cities like Misrata and Ras Lanuf have been reclaimed by government forces. Lisa Hollis.
Well, there you have it. We see the other scenes from to the east of Libya where the rebels are claiming that they're advancing. So it's hard to figure out what's going on over there. But I hope my guest, Don Dubar, who was with the group that we were all on that went to Tripoli in October of 2009, maybe we can figure out what in the world is going on over there. Don, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. How you doing?
Good, good. Now, we were over in Tripoli. We even were in Gaddafi's tent where we were subjected to, I think it was well over an hour. I had trouble keeping my eyes open, but we were in the front row, so I didn't want to fall asleep, especially since he had those two, shall we say, less than comical looking security guards on both sides of them. Looked like they both were packing something under their jackets, which I would not want to encounter at the other end. But what do you make of the situation over there? And do you think that we're getting, at least from the U.S. media, you think we're getting a good picture as to what's going on?
No, not at all. I mean, the coverage, first of all, the thing that's been remarkable up until the last day or two, since the whether you want to term it a revolution or an invasion, as at least one report that I saw in the Pakistani Observer termed it, where they said they were actually troops on the ground, like on the 23rd and 24th. However you term it, the situation, the media situation reminds me remarkably of the lead up to the invasion in Iraq in terms of the unanimity of opinion as to what facts exist without any actual documentation of them. You've had all kinds of claims that are made, and then they just sort of dissolve that, 1,000 people were killed here, and for instance, here's a big one, that he was bombing civilians. This is like a week and a half ago even. And reports from Russia Today, for example, of a statement coming out of the Kremlin where the Russians say our satellite surveillance has shown no aerial activity over Libya. That stuff doesn't make it out. And from the left to the right, everyone has this same narrative. And, if you remember the Iraq War, the reasons for going to war was Saddam Hussein is a tyrant that's demonstrated a complete disregard for human life. That's what's being ascribed to Gaddafi right now. The people of Iraq are oppressed and the world has a duty to help them. That's what's being presented now, that the people are up in arms against them. That's what the narrative says. That the oil reserves are necessary to the world economy. Of course, that's a big thing here in Libya. And that by removing Saddam Hussein, the future of the world will be safer from terrorist attacks. And, of course, there's a whole history of different terrorist attacks being ascribed to Gaddafi, where, under closer examination, of course, they weren't. It wasn't him.
Right, and isn't it amazing? We know that Richard Pearl actually was hired by Gaddafi's government to burnish his image here in Washington, yet we hear other neocons just itching to get Gaddafi because, they're hearkening back to the old situation in the 80s where Gaddafi was public enemy number one. Everybody loved to hate Gaddafi, and McCain was on one of the talking head shows today saying, well, Gaddafi's insane. Of course, this is McCain saying someone's insane, which is kind of rich in itself.
Well, insanity, I guess, distinguishable from Alzheimer's.
Right. And of course, he likened Gaddafi to Hitler. Now, where have we heard that before?
Right. That was also.
That was just
Saddam Hussein, right?
Right. I think what we have at play here, there probably was some sort of spontaneous uprising in Libya because we know that there's a lot of cross traffic there between there and Tunisia. Cairo's too far away, so maybe that didn't have too much of an impact. But I think what we're seeing here is the Obama administration. That now there's reports that they may be waffling a little bit because of the oil situation. And I think it gets right back to the common denominator and all these things. Now, we were there. We saw that construction that was going on. The Koreans were in there, the South Koreans, the Italians, the Chinese, doing all this massive they were building a new conference center, a new international airport. So I think there's a lot of people are looking at the situation and looking at their investments and saying, "Ooh, this is hurting us in the wallet." And it was amazing that after people started talking about no-fly zones and maybe putting troops in there, it seems like Gaddafi that all of a sudden went on the offensive. That all of a sudden he had people on his side where he may not have had many before, but maybe it's a deal where, look, he may be a dictator, but he's our dictator, and we're going to rally around him.
Well, you also have, from the point of view of a Libyan, you have the example of the experience of the people of Afghanistan and Iraq to point to as the result of American military involvement. Anyone, as you'll recall, when we were in Tripoli, the standard of living was actually quite high. I mean, Libya is a third world country, ostensibly, but the people there get a monthly check from the oil reserve, from the oil revenues from the state. It's treated not just nominally, but in fact as a public resource. And some of the money, I don't know what percentage it is, but people there, I was told, get a monthly stipend of between $2,000 and $3,000. Now, given the housing is heavily subsidized, the health care and education are free, and as you'll recall, buying food on the street, the food is cheap. People are doing quite well there.
As we remember, even the cigarettes are cheap.
That's right.
We can't say the same thing about the booze because it wasn't available. At least we didn't know where to get it.
That's right. That's right. Apparently, there is an underground for alcohol, but it's the population is largely Muslim, and that's I guess something that goes along with countries where you have a large Muslim population. Alcohol is frowned upon.
Right, absolutely, and getting into the sort of the profile of Gaddafi, certainly he has been a colorful figure for what now over 4 decades. He was pushing this green book. It was the 40th anniversary of the revolution. The conference was called the Conference on Green Book Supporters. Of course, I don't know how many people there were actually supporting the Green Book, but I do remember his portrait was everywhere. It sort of reminded me of what you might see in Pyongyang, where the dear leader Kim Jong-il is peering down at you at every vantage point.
It's funny because for me, I kind of got the same eerie feeling I used to have going to the post office and looking at Ronald Reagan looking down on But one of the things that I learned while we were in Tripoli, I learned actually from Bob Petrakis, the journalist from Ohio that was part of our group also. And that was after reading the Green Book. I hadn't looked at it in this context, but he said essentially, if you looked at it, it is, and didn't put Gaddafi on it, and didn't tie it into Libya, that you would think you were reading a new left tome from the mid-'60s in terms of the type of government structures or lack of structures that it espoused, and the sort of socialist, almost like anarcho-socialist economic philosophy that it had.
Right. If you combine the Green Book with Mao's Red Book, you would have some sort of like a Christmas novel, with the colors and everything. But anyway, it was. Yeah, go ahead.
The other interesting thing was when we went, which was October of 2009, if memory serves.
Right.
At the same time that was going on, I live in Westchester County, New York, and there was a huge controversy in the local press over Gaddafi had wanted in late September, early October to visit the United Nations. He did visit the United Nations, and he was looking for a place to set up a tent. And, I had no idea until we visited the compound what they meant by tent. This is something...
That was a nice tent.
Yeah, like they have weddings in like an upscale wedding. It's very, very air-conditioned and all of that.
Chandeliers and carpet.
There was a town in New Jersey that wouldn't allow it. And then Bedford Hills, New York, they wouldn't allow it. And there was huge, I'd say somewhat manufactured, but a huge public issue over whether or not Gaddafi would be allowed to stay in these towns around.
Don, hold that thought. We've got a break, and we'll come right back with Gaddafi and the pitching of the tent in New York and Jersey right after this short break.